president of the American Association of Pro-Life OBGYNs. I think that's very cool. Yeah. And has served that organization in its executive board over the years. Lately, in fact, this year in January, he sold his practice to go full-time with Samaritan's Purse, and he'll be speaking to us tonight on behalf of his work through Samaritan's Purse and World Medical Missions. He's also doing a divinity degree at Liberty University while he's making this transition in his life. Wow, energy that I wish I had some of. He's done a lot of medical missions trips, and this is what turns my crank. I get real excited to talk about this. He's been at Kujap Nazarene Hospital in the highlands of Papua New Guinea several times. He's been at Kijabi Hospital in Kenya, He's worked also at Tanwick Hospital in Bomet, Kenya. Mbingo, I think I'm saying that wrong. Let's say Hospital of Hope in Mango, Togo, West Africa, close to where I get to go in Burkina Faso. Also at Mbingo Baptist Hospital in Mbingo, Cameroon. So a lot of work in lots of places, always under the guidance and affiliation with Good Samaritan. He spoke last year, or 2 years ago, at the Mobilizing Medical Missions Conference in Houston at Lakewood Church. We have a group representing Lakewood Church here tonight, where Dr. Paul Osteen does medical missions from there. That is a fantastic conference. If any of you can get a chance to go, it's in the spring and February. He's speaking again at the one coming up in February. I would encourage you to have been to both of them. The third one's coming up. He has done lots of things. I said that. He helped at Katrina, disaster relief after Katrina in New Orleans. I think he would probably put all that aside and say it's not all that important. The most important accomplishments in his life. He's been married 30 years to his wife, Teresa, has 2 boys in college and grad school, 2 twin daughters they adopted from China at the age of 13 months. Beautiful girls, 15 years of age. Wonderful. I think he would hold that up as really what he is most proud of in his life. But we are pleased and honored and delighted to introduce him to you, and he is going to speak to us tonight on the topic of serving outside of your comfort zone. So Dr. Sawyer, Allan, to me, please come. He comes with the blessings of Dr. Franklin Graham and Samaritan's Purse.
Yes? Everybody hear me now? Let's get rid of this. Is that okay? Thank you for asking me to be here. It's very, very much of an honor, and I can't believe the connections that I've made in just the last 24 hours and the amount of common ground we have among this relatively small medical community in missions. Just a quick prayer, if I could. Lord Jesus, thank you for having me here. Thank you for this group of people. Father, I pray that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart will be pleasing in thy sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. So, there's lots of Alaskans that live in Arizona. They come down there when it gets cold up here and warm up. So when my friends from Alaska down in Arizona heard that I was coming up here, they wanted to give me some advice, and I appreciate that. They told me, now if somebody asks you, where does the sun rise and set? The answer is south. It's not east and west. So I got that down. And then they also told me, they said something that kind of was confusing. They said that even if I'm inside of a room with a roof over my head and walls around me, that I'm still from outside. So I don't know what you mean by that. And then George took me on this fabulous car ride today and took me on this tour, and I was looking at these mountains coming out of the ocean, and I was thinking of something that, don't confuse latitude and longitude with altitude, that if you're on a boat on the ocean in Alaska, even though you're this far north, you're still at sea level. So this is my dog. This is Sadie, and if you're a gynecologist, what do you give your dog to chew on? A stuffed uterus with fallopian tubes and ovaries attached. And so Sadie's looking pretty comfortable here. She's on her rug, and the drapes are drawn, and she's in a climate-controlled house, and she's got her stuffed uterus, and life is good, and she's very comfortable. But about 20 years ago, I was challenged to go outside of my comfort zone and to leave my stuffed uterus behind. And it was actually a friend of mine who's a pediatrician in China, a very good friend of mine. And John and I were out to breakfast, and John said, "Alan, how many patients do you pray for each day?" That kind of took me off guard. I said, "Well, John, how many patients do you pray for each day?" And he said, "All of them." And I said, no, out loud, not just when you're walking in the room and looking at their chart. Out loud, how many patients do you pray for each day? And he said, well, all but two. Two mothers asked me not to pray with their children as a pediatrician. And so he said, well, Alan, how many patients are you praying for each day? And I said, maybe one, which was kind of stretching the truth a little bit. And some other things were going on in my life, and so I really felt convicted that I needed to make my faith a part of my medical practice. And so I had met a lady in the emergency room. This wasn't her, but she didn't look that much different from her. And she needed a hysterectomy. So we had her all scheduled. I saw her for a pre-op visit. I got all done with the pre-op visit, did the counseling, signed a consent form, did her exam. And then I sensed that I needed to pray for this lady. And I'm thinking, yeah, I'll pray for her. I'll pray for her when she's on the operating room table under anesthesia and I'm washing my hands out of the scrub sink. And I felt very convicted that I needed to pray for her right then out loud. And so I said to her, I said, ma'am, what's your spiritual background? And she said, I'm Christian. And I said, well, that's great, so am I. Do you mind if I pray for you? And she said, these were her exact words. She said, well, doctor, I don't know no prayers. And I said, well, that's okay. You don't have to say anything. I'll pray for you. So I scooted up my chair in front of her, and I put my hands in her hands, and I just prayed the normal prayer that the surgery would go well, she wouldn't be anxious, that she would recover nicely, prayed for the team that would be helping her. And she, as I was praying for her, her tears were landing on the backs of my hands. And I was so touched because I was so far out of my comfort zone to do that, and somebody that kind of looked different than me, and so it was a really beautiful thing, and I knew that I had done the right thing. So around the same time, there was a woman on the other side of the world who was in Papua New Guinea, and she was in labor. And imagine a place that looks like this. This is a picture taken of Papua New Guinea. But this young Papua New Guinean girl was in labor. She had been a child bride. She was only in her mid-teens when she got married and got pregnant right after that. And she went into labor. In Papua New Guinea, in this area, when you go into labor, you go into a little hut. It's actually called a menstrual hut. And they would lay banana leaves on the floor, and the women would labor with the help of the other women in the community who were, quote, midwives, but they usually don't have any training. So Lynette was in labor, and when it finally came time to deliver her baby, her labor pains were so strong, and she pushed, and she pushed, and she pushed. And it didn't take long, and they realized that something was very wrong. And it was the middle of the night. The nearest road was a 2-hour walk away. The hospital was 4 hours beyond that in the back of a pickup truck, and so that just wasn't a possibility. So Lynette pushed and pushed and pushed. She pushed all night long. She pushed most of the next day, pushed into the next night, and finally delivered a stillborn baby. But that was just the beginning of the tragedy, because Lynette noticed immediately afterwards that she had no control over her urine, and that urine was just coming out of her all the time. Eventually her her husband asked her to go live in actually the whole clan asked her to go and live in a hut away from everybody else because she smelled so bad all the time. And so Lineth went over and lived in a little hut. She had a friend that was dear to her and would bring her food and help her wash her clothes. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to move on to a different story. I'm actually going to break up Lineth's story over the course of this talk. In 2012, we took a team from Samaritan's Purse from Kujip Nazarene Hospital, and we flew to the Hewa tribe. Well, in order to get to the Hewa tribe, we had to fly in a fixed-wing aircraft, land at the jungle airstrip, and we were supposed to be met by U-Tribe's Mission Aviation helicopters to fly us over the last 10 miles over the terrain and drop us off in the jungle. The MAF pilot for the fixed-wing aircraft dropped us off at this jungle airstrip in Fiawana and said, I have instrument flight ratings that allowed me to land at this airstrip, but the helicopters are all VFR, they're all visual flight rules. They can't land through this weather right now. So what do you want me to do? Do you want me to take you guys back? Do you want me to leave you here? From all the team that was there were about a dozen of us. Only my wife and I knew how potentially dangerous this place was. The missionaries who had been there had left because one of the men that they were working with had been decapitated right on their doorstep by a group of people called the Pela tribe. So I asked one of the people there, I said, are the Pela here? And they said, no, Pela are at a tribal port miles from here, and so they're not here right now. And so I told the pilot, the Pela aren't here, I'm fine, we'll stay. And so the plane flew off, and I felt a little bit like Gilligan watching the plane go away, and because we're truly stranded, there's no communication with the outside world at all. And so we actually broke into the missionary's house. It was all boarded up. We broke in, we swept the rat droppings away, and we spent the night. And then the next morning, we were all woken up by the sound of a helicopter, the blades breaking the air and coming and landing right in front of the house. Jonathan Kopp, the missionary that we were going to work with, was in the helicopter, and Jonathan looked exhausted. And he said, my wife and I, Susan and I, were up all night long praying that you weren't where you were. So probably the most commonly asked question I get asked is it safe? And I'd like to read to you from just a short section from C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, a Witch, and a Wardrobe. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Chronicles of Narnia is an allegory about God's relationship with us. And Aslan is God, and he's a lion. And the people in the story are both humans and animals. And so this is between Susan and Lucy and Mr. and Mrs. Beaver talking. And Susan says, "Who is Aslan?" asked Susan. "Aslan?" said Mr. Beaver. "Why don't you know him? He's the king of the wood. He's the lord of the whole wood, but not often here, you understand. Never in my time, or in my father's time. Is he a man?" asked Susan. "Aslan? A man?" said Mr. Beaver sternly. "Certainly not. I tell you, he is the king of the wood and the son of the great emperor beyond the sea. Don't you know who is the king of beasts? Aslan is a lion, the great lion." "Oh," said Susan, "I thought he was mad. Is he quite safe? I should feel rather nervous about meeting a lion." "That you will, dearie. And make no mistake," said Mrs. Beaver. "If there's anyone who can appear before Aslan without their knees knocking, they're either braver than most or else just silly." "Then he isn't safe?" said Lucy. "Safe?" said Mr. Beaver. "Don't you hear what Mrs. Beaver tells you? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. He's the king, I tell you." So I don't want there to be any illusion that going outside and serving outside your comfort zone is safe. As all of you have heard, 12 days ago, a Cessna aircraft crash landed in the fog on the Yukon River here. Switch. And missionary pilot Kyle Stevens was killed. I know that was big news here in Anchorage, and it did make it all the way down to lower 48. I didn't know Kyle. I know that there's probably people in this room that did know him. But what I do know about Kyle is that Kyle was doing what he loved to do, and that was to fly. He was flying because he loved people, and he especially loved the kids at the Keiko Retreat Center. Kyle's mother last week wrote, "Kyle was not afraid to die because death means being with the Lord that he loves." When I read about Kyle and I read about his passion for flying, I thought of a poem that's famous, you've probably heard it before, by John McGee. "Oh, I have slipped the surly bounds of earth and danced the skies on laughter's silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds, and done 100 things you have not dreamed of. Wheeled and soared and swung high in sunlit silence. Hovering there I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through footless halls of air. Up through delirious, burning blue, I've topped the windswept heights with easy grace, where never lark or even eagle flew. And while with silent lifting mind I've trod the high untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God." The point here is that Kyle wasn't afraid to go outside of his comfort zone, even in flying in less than optimal conditions. As often is the case here in Alaska, in a land of unpredictable weather. And as with all bush pilots, they know that death is a possibility. I want to continue on with my story of Lynette. Several years passed with Lynette living in the hut away from everybody else. And Lynette's friend heard that there was a visiting doctor visiting from the United States at Coogee Nazarene Hospital, that he might be able to help. So they walked 2 hours to get to the nearest road. They got in the back of a pickup truck. Lynette was actually glad to be in the back of the pickup truck so that when it was moving, nobody could smell her. And they made this long trek to the hospital. They finally got there, and there was a long line of patients, so they waited in line to get to the triage nurse. The triage nurse listened to her complaint and told her to go sit where the gynecology patients were, and she waited all morning, over lunch, into the afternoon. She finally was brought into an exam room that was hot and stuffy. There was a window up high on the wall that faced the west, and the sun was beating down into the room. There was a big white doctor wearing this blue outfit and a white coat, and through 3 interpreters, Lynette told her story. The doctor wanted to do an exam on her, and he wanted to look at the source of her smell, the dirtiest part of her body, and out of her desire to be helped and healed, she allowed him to look at her and to touch her there. And this confirmed that there was a hole, a fistula, between her bladder and her vagina. From my perspective, everything was not so wonderful. Although I'm a gynecologist and experienced vaginal surgeon, I've never repaired a vesicovaginal fistula before. I went to a general surgeon friend of mine who was with me, and I said, "John, have you ever fixed a vesicovaginal fistula before?" And he said, "No." I said, "Well, I have a patient with a VVF. What should I do?" And he said, "Well, I think you should fix it." He said, "Do you know somebody in this country that knows more about fixing a VVF than you?" I said, "No." So I went to the library and I found a book. I opened it up, and there were 2 paragraphs. There was one paragraph on how to fix a vesicovaginal fistula from above, and then there's another paragraph on how to fix a vesicovaginal fistula from below. Every word was highlighted, every word was underlined, so I knew that somebody had been in the same situation. The next day I took Linus to the operating room. Micah, this next part's for you, okay? 2 days ago, Kenya was supposed to have another general election. But because of civil disorder, that election did not take place. Nearly a decade ago, on January 1st, 2008, because of the election violence in Kenya, this set up brutal tribal fighting, especially in Eldoret, which is where Micah is from. And it's the hometown of the president of Kenya. And so these evil men came in and they were hacking the men with machetes, and the women and the children went and sought refuge in an Assemblies of God church. They thought they'd be safe there. But these evil men with evil in their hearts took mattresses soaked in paraffin, and they lit them on fire and they shoved them through the windows of the church. And then as the women and the children were running out of the front door of the church, they were hacking them with machetes and throwing the children back into the burning building. 4 of those children survived, and they and their mothers were eventually brought to Kajabi Hospital in Kenya, to the pediatric burn unit. It was there a few months after this incident that my wife, that's in the picture, then Beth Nowatzki, that's on your left, and then my 4 children went in to see these children. And you know, initially my kids and my wife had never seen people with burns like this before, and there's a distinct odor. And I was worried about my kids and how they would react to seeing these burns and smelling the odor in that room. But it took them just a few minutes to get past the smell and the sight, and they realized that these were just kids who had been the victim of somebody else's violence. I had asked Beth is now a nurse in Phoenix, she's like a daughter to me. But I had asked, and Beth sings like an angel, and I had asked Beth, I said, Beth, if I'm going to take you to Kenya, I want you to be prepared to sing. If I ask you to sing, I just want you to start singing. And so I looked at Beth and I said, Beth, would you sing something? And so Beth goes in the corner of this little hospital room with 4 pediatric burn patients and their mothers and my whole family, and she starts to sing Amazing Grace. Is it okay to sing Amazing Grace in Africa? I mean, it was written by John Newton. John Newton was a slave boat captain. He wrote the song to the tune that he listened to the captives, the slaves that were in his ship, in holds of his ship chained in there. He wrote the song to the tune that they were singing in the holds of his ship. So afterwards I asked one of the pastors, I said, is it okay that we sing Amazing Grace in Africa? And he said, oh, doctor, Amazing Grace is the national anthem for Christians in Africa, all across Africa, in every language. And so Beth sang this song, and people started to pour in from the pediatric unit, and the whole doorway and the windows were just crammed full of people. It was just a beautiful moment. And so here I was, taking my family outside of their comfort zone and making them be grown and stretched. And I'm truly grateful for that. I'd like to finish Linus' story. This is Linus. I have to tell you, I did add a few dreadlocks using PowerPoint, or Photoshop. It had been 3 weeks since the surgery, and Linus had 2 catheters. She had a catheter coming out of her urethra and another one coming out of her abdomen. But Linus hadn't leaked for 3 weeks. One day, the big white doctor came in and removed the catheter from her urethra and he clamped the other catheter, and Linus didn't leak any urine. She was able to use the restroom and void when she wanted to, and the next day, I took out the abdominal catheter. Linus said she'll never forget that day. She said that her life was saved that day. Truly, I think I was more terrified of the surgery than she was. She just thought that this was something that I did all the time. And yet, she was entirely trusting of me. She allowed me to touch her in her misery. She trusted me, and I was way outside of my comfort zone. But there was a tremendous sense that God had been on my side, that he had guided me through the surgery, that he guided me during those 3 weeks in terms of what to do with her recovery. And I don't know how to adequately express the depth of joy that it feels as a physician to be able to do a surgery like this that isn't something that you do every day, and really serve outside your comfort zone, and then to actually see the Lord answer those prayers and to see these people get healed, and for there not to be a complication. And it certainly doesn't happen that way all the time. This is a wonderful story, but I sense God's pleasure. And as I was thinking about that and how I wanted to convey that to you, I was reminded of Eric Liddell. For those of you who are old enough in the room, you remember the movie Chariots of Fire and Eric Liddell. Eric was born January 11th, 1902 in China to Scottish missionary parents. And Eric was fast. He was a runner. Arguably the best athlete to ever come out of Scotland. And in this video clip that I'm going to show you, he's on furlough with his sister in Scotland. She desperately wants him to return to China to resume his missionary duties, but he has his mind set on the 1924 Olympics. And so well, I'll just play the video for you. You can watch it.
I've decided I'm going back to China. The missionary service for example.
Oh, so pleased.
I've got a lot of running to do first. Jenny, you've got to understand. I believe that God made me for a purpose. For China. But He also made me for life. And when I run, I feel His pleasure. To give it up would be to hold Him in contempt. You will learn it. It's not just fun. To win is to honour Him. Jen.
Following the Olympics, Eric returned to China the following year to serve as a missionary teacher. He did come back to Scotland for two more furloughs, but then Eric died in the Japanese internment camp in 1945, 5 months before liberation. Well, the point of my entire message tonight, and what I would like to convey is to encourage people to go outside their comfort zone, to serve selflessly, to give generously, to love deeply. In 2008, when we went to Kajabi, Kenya, I also took a chief resident, Nicole Seacott, from Good Samaritan Medical Center in Phoenix, and I invited her to go with us. She had never been out of the country before. And Nicole's husband, Ben, owned a flooring company in Phoenix. And we said, Ben, you should come along. He said, no, you guys go play doctor. I'll stay here. I'll man the fort. And I said, Ben, come on, there's always something for you to do. And Ben said, no, there's been all this election violence. There's 250,000 internally displaced people in Kenya. It's too dangerous. I'm just going to stay here with the store. And so Nicole and my family all went to Kenya. And first day, Nicole walked into the hospital. Guess what? They were ripping up all the tile on the floors to replace it with new tile. And that's her husband's business. And she realized that Ben had missed the blessing. He hadn't come. And it was just too far out of his comfort zone. He made an excuse in the decision that he did. SOYCZ, serving outside your comfort zone, loving your neighbor. What makes you uncomfortable? Is it maybe going in and teaching a group of elementary school students? Would it be prison ministry? Would it be disaster relief somewhere? On the other side of the screen there is me doing oral surgery. I'm doing extractions in the middle of the jungle. And my wife, who's an accountant, my chief financial officer, she's my dental assistant. That was outside my comfort zone. And I didn't tell my patients that I was a gynecologist because they didn't know the word for gynecologist. In Scripture, in Matthew 22, Jesus is asked by a Jewish teacher, a Jewish lawyer, "Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law?" Trying to trick him. And Jesus wisely condenses down all the laws of the Pharisees. And he says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like unto it. Love your neighbor as yourself." All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. On my way home from Papua New Guinea, the first time I was there, I read a quote by Mother Teresa, who was asked on the topic of, out of all the hundreds of thousands of people who need your help, how do you know who to serve? And she said, "I serve the one that's in front of me." And I've always thought that the person that's in front of you is your neighbor. So how do you do that? What's the next step? I just condense it down to support and serve. Support organizations like Alaska Medical Missions. If it were not for organizations like Alaska Medical Missions and Samaritan's Purse, I can't go do what I need to do. I can't possibly take all those supplies with me. I can't even get access to all those supplies. And then go yourself and serve. Do something that's a stretch for you that you don't feel so comfortable doing. Do something so outrageously outside your comfort zone that if God doesn't show up, you're going to fail miserably. And then love the person that's in front of you where you go. And I'd like to just close with, well, actually on this slide, I left my email address for anybody that wants to contact me afterwards. And, I do blog. I only blog when I travel. And I put one ministry opportunity for people who would be interested in doing disaster relief with Samaritan's Purse. But I'd like to leave you with my favorite benediction. And that is, may the peace of the Lord Christ be with you, wherever he may send you. May he guide you through the wilderness and protect you through the storm. May he bring you home rejoicing at the wonders he has shown. May he bring you home rejoicing once again through these doors.